The word hung in the air, a noxious little seed dropped into the otherwise carefully cultivated garden of my sister's engagement party. Impure. She'd leaned in, her voice a stage whisper, her eyes, usually bright and a little too sharp, clouded with a self-righteous glaze that was all too familiar. It wasn't the first time she'd delivered a judgment, but this one felt different, laced with a venom that scraped against something deep inside me. I'd just been talking about a trip I'd taken, a solo adventure that had expanded my world, and somehow, in her interpretation, it had rendered me less than. My life, outwardly, was a tapestry of quiet competence. I had a steady job, a small but comfortable apartment, and a circle of friends who valued substance over sparkle. My family, however, was another story. My parents, perpetually mediating the twin sons of my sister's ego and my own quiet nature, had always encouraged a sense of unity, a familial bond that often felt more like a silken trap. My sister, Amelia, had always been the radiant center of our universe, the one who drew all the light. I, the moon, reflected it, or so it seemed to everyone else. She was the kind of person who curated her life with the precision of a museum director, every object, every relationship, placed just so to elicit admiration. And I, the perpetual supporting act, had learned to blend into the background, my contributions acknowledged with a perfunctory nod. This wasn't a sudden eruption, it was a slow, simmering pressure cooker of unspoken resentments and Amelia's unwavering conviction in her own moral superiority. I remembered, years ago, after our grandmother passed, Amelia had insisted on handling the estate. She'd spent days poring over documents, her brow furrowed in mock distress, while simultaneously ensuring every valuable piece of jewelry, every antique trinket, was carefully catalogued and ultimately divided in a way that always seemed to favor her own sentimental attachments. I'd simply watched, too weary to argue, accepting the chipped teacup and the faded linen tablecloth while she took the pearl necklace and the grandfather clock. It was easier, I'd told myself, to let her have her way. Then there was the incident with my college graduation. I'd worked tirelessly, funded my own education through scholarships and part-time jobs, and walked across that stage with a quiet sense of accomplishment. Amelia, who had had her education largely subsidized by our parents, had called me that evening, her voice dripping with forced cheerfulness. "So proud of you," she'd gushed, "though I wonder how you managed all that while, your life. Some sacrifices are just more significant than others, aren't they?" The implication was clear, my independence, my choices, were somehow less valid, less noble, than her more conventional path. She'd managed to steal the joy right out of my biggest achievement, leaving behind a bitter aftertaste of inadequacy. I'd learned to swallow those barbs, to let them slide off my back like rain, accumulating in a reservoir of quiet observation. The wedding day dawned with an unnerving perfection. The sky was a relentless, cloudless blue, the air thick with the scent of roses and the hushed anticipation of a grand occasion. Amelia, a vision in ivory, moved through the throngs of congratulatory guests like a queen surveying her domain. I, dressed in a simple navy dress, felt a familiar invisibility cloak settle over me. My parents, beaming, ushered me towards Amelia for a customary pre-ceremony hug. This was where the carefully constructed facade was meant to crack, where the impure comment from the engagement party would finally manifest its full, ugly bloom. The reception hall buzzed with a carefully curated energy. Crystal chandeliers dripped light, laughter mingled with the clinking of champagne flutes, and the air thrummed with a symphony of polite applause. Amelia, radiant and triumphant, stood at the head table, her new husband by her side, a picture of effortless grace. My parents had orchestrated a series of toasts, each one a testament to Amelia's virtues and her new life. Then, it was my turn. My father, always the peacemaker, motioned me forward. I walked towards the microphone, the weight of expectation pressing down on me. As I reached the podium, I could feel Amelia's eyes on me, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in her posture. I began with a simple anecdote about our childhood, a shared memory that was meant to be warm and light-hearted. But as I spoke, I saw it. Amelia's expression, which had started as polite attention, began to curdle. Her lips tightened, her eyes narrowed, and a flush crept up her neck. It wasn't about the story, it was about my delivery, my composure. It was about the fact that I, the one she'd deemed impure, was standing there, composed, articulate, and seemingly unaffected. The room seemed to fall into a strange, elongated silence as I continue. My voice steady, unwavering. Amelia's smile faltered, then vanished completely, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. Her jaw clenched, and I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to process this deviation from her script. The silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable, punctuated only by the occasional hesitant cough. The real work began after the last guest had departed, after the congratulatory texts and the family calls had begun to flood my phone. Amelia, predictably, was a whirlwind of frantic communication, her carefully constructed composure shattered. Her messages were a torrent of accusations, veiled threats, and thinly disguised pleas. She accused me of being passive-aggressive, of sabotaging her special day, of deliberately trying to humiliate her. The irony was almost too delicious to bear. She'd expected me to shrink, to apologize, to beg for her forgiveness. Instead, I'd simply presented a truth she couldn't control. The next few days were a masterclass in familial fallout. My mother, bless her well-meaning heart, tried to mediate, her voice a wavering plea for reconciliation. "She's just stressed, dear," she'd say. "Weddings are so overwhelming. You know Amelia." My father, ever practical, was more direct. "What was that all about, kiddo? She's really upset." Amelia's friends, her loyal court, started to chime in, their texts carrying the unmistakable echo of her narrative. They spoke of my coldness, my bitterness, my unexplained resentment. They were her flying monkeys, sent to do her bidding, to spread her version of events and, hopefully, to isolate me. But I had anticipated the storm. While Amelia was busy orchestrating her social media blackout and rallying her allies, I was making a few quiet phone calls of my own. I had secured my position, not with bluster or anger, but with the quiet, undeniable power of documentation and foresight. The will, meticulously crafted by our grandmother, had always been a source of subtle tension. Amelia, believing herself to be the sole custodian of family legacy, had always hinted at her predetermined role as its primary beneficiary. What she hadn't realized, what she'd dismissed as a sentimental gesture from an elderly woman, was the inclusion of a specific codicil. A codicil that stipulated a certain contribution to be made to a charitable foundation, a foundation I had quietly established and actively managed for years. The amount, a significant portion of what she'd assumed would be her inheritance, was to be disbursed only upon the irrevocable dissolution of certain family assets she had assumed she would control indefinitely. The formal notification, a stark white envelope bearing the seal of my legal counsel, arrived a week after the wedding. I didn't hand it to Amelia, that would have been too direct, too confrontational. Instead, I arranged for it to be delivered to her marital home, a carefully timed announcement that coincided with the peak of her wedding hangover and her burgeoning family drama. I saw her later that week, at a strange Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Her face, usually so animated, was drawn and pale. Her eyes darted around the room, a trapped animal's gaze. She was no longer the radiant bride, she was a woman staring into the abyss of her own making. When she caught my eye, the arrogance had completely drained from her face, replaced by a dawning, horrified realization. The impure word had been a careless, venomous utterance. My quiet compliance had been a strategy. My perceived weakness, my greatest strength. The silence that followed was deafening, a testament to a carefully executed fall, and the satisfaction, cold and clean, was mine.